Hi everyone, it's Jerry. Recently, chess legend and many times over world chess champion Garry Kasparov, I guess we could say, came out of retirement for just a very brief window of time. On November 28th, 2014, he played a two-game chess exhibition match against Yoshiharu Habu. Those who are not familiar with Habu, he is widely considered one of the greatest shogi players, having recently won his 1,300th professional shogi match. He is only one of 4 players ever to reach that feat, and the youngest ever at the age of 44 to do so. Additionally, he is a FIDE chess master, having a rating of just over 2,400, and is the #1 ranked chess player in Japan. These two games were played in an effort to promote a series of shogi games between professional players and computers that will take place in March of 2015. So if you're interested in shogi, I guess be on the lookout for that. These two games had rapid time controls that I'm going to review here briefly. Rapid time controls with 25 minutes each and a 10-second increment. In this first game, Kasparov, he had the white pieces, opening with knight f3, Habu replying with knight f6. On the white end, Kasparov goes forward with a King's Indian setup, looking for a King's Indian attack, essentially, getting in this e4 push. And after black castles in e5, basically the battle lines have already been drawn. White is looking to go straight after the black king with these typical maneuvers, rook e1, knight f1, h4, and the knight rerouting to this g4 square. One thing to note here is that instead of castles, if black is capturing on e4, notice how there is the immediate recapture without fear of dropping e4. If knight takes e4, there would follow the strong reply knight e5, and black is in a very difficult position. You may think that the knight can simply move out of the way and defend the bishop, and while that's true, notice how both the knight and this pawn here on f7 would be unprotected. Queen f3, and this is basically game over. So the short story here is that it's not wise to take twice on this e4 square. So black simply gets on with more development, castling. e5 is in, knight d7, rook e1, dual purpose, defend the pawn, make way for this knight maneuver. c5, knight f1, knight c6, some natural stuff. Here comes h4. There's an additional meaning behind this as well. It's not just there to vacate h2, but also looks to plant up here to h5 and looking to induce some further weaknesses with h6, weakening these dark squares. The f6 square in particular can certainly turn out to be quite sensitive. Following up, we have knight to d4, and this is already a slight misstep. Maybe you might regard it as a big misstep, as black is now going to lose a pawn. Instead of knight d4, a better attempt is to expand further on the queen side with b5. In a way, it's maybe, I guess we could say, losing a tempo. I think black can achieve a similar position and still have this pawn get to the b5 square in one stroke, but this would have been, I guess, a better attempt at this stage. But after knight d4, this is now going to be big trouble for black. After knight takes, knight, pawn takes, we don't really get into this situation where the knight is coming into g4. Instead, it's queen g4, immediately hitting at two things: the unprotected d4 pawn, and, well, with this pawn being pinned, there's this idea of bishop to h6. And this is the more pressing issue right here. This is the more serious threat for the bishop to get into h6. And so the end result is that black is now going to drop this pawn without much compensation at all. In fact, I don't think that there is compensation. Trying to defend like this, again, bishop h6, and you have to give up the exchange. So black is having to give up the pawn. Rook e8, queen takes d. And white is just looking for some simplification. c3 is good enough. f6, takes. Queen gets back over to an aggressive post on g4. Knight e5, and now simply bishop to f4. It's a very difficult road ahead. We're going to have now the queens being exchanged. White basically needing to consolidate. There's no compensation here. White gets rocked back just a little bit. Pawn takes, pawn takes. This pawn is now a bit sensitive. White has a simple idea of just piling up on that guy. Rook to d8. Rook e2. Here we go with the battery against e4. It's not really a good way to defend. Bishop e5. Knight e3. A couple more minor pieces come off. The rooks are doubled. Another pawn is going to fall. A black rook now gets very active, but it's not really going to be enough with white now being up a full pawn. And on top of this, we're now seeing a very active knight. This guy on g5 and the rook on e4 coordinate very well against this black king. In fact, there's already this mate threat on e8 and even ideas to win the bishop. This is, after all, a loose piece on c7. So black's very limited, playing bishop d6. Rook gives a check. The bishop now has to get into a pin. And now rook to b8. Initially I was thinking to pile up on the pinned piece, but the king could sneak out with king f7. So instead it's rook to b8. Now this is a serious threat. Black has to defend that square and does so with rook e2. King f1. Rook e7. White is now up still a second pawn and is now quick to get right back to pin this bishop. After king g7 getting out of the pin, after c4, it's at this point that Habu resigns. There's not a good way to prevent the very simple marching of this passed pawn to promotion. The king has to stay here to defend the bishop. The bishop can't move at all, and the rook can't go too far either because of this knight check. This is the only safe square, but it could be kicked away with f4. If rook e3, there's king f2. If bishop here, you could attack the bishop. This is very big trouble for Team Black. Bishop d4, rook d5. There's just not going to be a good way out of this from this position. Bishop b6, you could play c5. You're going to be winning a piece. And if black doesn't want to win a piece, there's just nothing type of moves that could be played here. Just passing along here, the pawn just marches again. As soon as it gets to this point, it would be indirectly defended due to a fork. But again, in this game one, it was after this c4 move that Habu resigned. So let's have a look at this second game. That first one here that I just showed was kind of over after just a dozen moves. Just going back here. As soon as that knight to d4 move was played right here, there's real big trouble right here. In fact, yes, after this knight to d4 move, that was the big mistake in this game. This second game, however, this was a much more closely fought game for sure. With now the colors reversed, Habu having the white side, he opens with e4. Have the, I guess you could say the modern defense here on the black side, going with the king side fianchetto. We have an interesting idea on the black side to, well, not be so quick to castle for one because of these ideas of exchanging dark square bishops and launching this h-pawn up. White is very quick to queenside castle and play on the h-file if black is to do so, or if black is to allow the dark square bishop exchange. So in other words, this knight will not be so quick to develop, at least not without having, let's say, this pawn first on h6. We do see that take shape, in fact. After h4 here, black plays h6, Kasparov plays h6 here, preparing to meet h5 with g5. White castles, b5, knight h3, knight f6, and now f3, keeping that knight out of the g4 square, trying to preserve that dark square bishop. Knight b6, knight f4, and now after b4, there's a misstep here on the white side. The move played was knight e2, and this is allowing this dark square bishop to be picked right up. A better move is knight to b4, just staying out of the way of this light square bishop so you could keep a close eye on c4, but instead it was knight e2. Black is now able to pick up that bishop, and will now look to play on the dark squares. First, it's with c6, watching out for that d5 square and clearing the diagonal for the queen. King b1, queen b6. This queen, after all, is unprotected, and what comes to mind are ideas like e5 to break down these dark squares. White gets out of that with queen d2. h5. h5 is interesting. If you're going with a quick castle, you could come under some heavy fire after g4, g5, and this h-file will be quick to be peeled open. Notice the queen from d2, should the h-file be opened up, she would be quick to make use of the h2 square and form a battery, looking to attack that black king. So it's first h5, making some type of pawn break, certainly making white's h5 advance more difficult to get in, having a big grip over the g4 square essentially with this last move, h5. Following up, we have e5, kicking that knight away. He goes back to, well, he doesn't go back anywhere. In fact, I was thinking here, there'd be something seriously wrong with knight to d7. I should be pointing this out. Knight to d7 is met with this crushing e6 move. Forget about your kingside structure. This is getting destroyed. Broken right down. g6 is weak. This knight is hit. Black is still on castle. This would be a very poor choice. So instead it's knight d5. Gives up a pawn, but notice how we're quick to maybe have, well, not quick to have anything, but we're going to have a situation where the kings are castled on opposite wings, so having material plus is not necessarily such a big factor. In the game we had rook to a7. Another move that could have been played is simply castles without fear of queen takes rook because of bishop to b7. We could have this imbalance, and at the end black can be very disruptive to the coordination of the white pieces. If white is trying something like f4 to negate this bishop, there can follow bishop h6, and if let's say rook h3 trying to get some coordination in this manner, queen to f2 is a very strong move, putting a ton of pressure on basically every white piece. It's not so easy to coordinate should white give up the queen and get the two rooks in return. So what follows is rook a7. We didn't have castle. It was certainly a fine option, but instead it was rook a7, queen d4, offering a queen exchange. White is, after all, up a pawn. Black avoids that. Knight f4, and we have this exchange. I guess white at this stage was content with giving the pawn back in order to get the dark square bishop. That's the main imbalance in this position. Aside from material, it's related to black having the bishop pair versus these two guys. Knight f4. The alternative is to simply preserve that pawn with f4, but this also allows this bishop to get right in here, and there's still a lot of pressure that black could be placing on the white side. So sensing that type of pressure, white invests some material back, giving the e-pawn up, gets the bishop with this series of exchanges here, and now we have a pretty much dead equal position. Very active rook here, and, well, I shouldn't even say dead equal. I would probably prefer to play the white side here, having the more active rook. Black still needing to get castled here, and, well, as we see with these next two moves, rook d5, rook a7, notice the more actively placed rook at this stage. So after this check, king f8, this isn't much of an inconvenience to the black side. The king will be quite all right on g7. White doubles, king g7. We have a little bit of a back and forth here. Kasparov is not so quick to exchange bishops, but I guess cannot avoid it. Wants to go for some more, so he tries something else. We have the bishops come off now, and it's a rook ending alone. Who stands the better side? This now starts to tip ever so slightly in black's favor due to, I believe, the king position. As we'll soon see, black first puts some pressure on c2, white's there to defend. White can't be so, or white isn't so inconvenienced by having to defend this c2 pawn, but if we do a piece comparison, a king comparison, again, it's black's king who's a little bit better. He starts to get active with king f6, king to e5. Where is this king going exactly? He's taking a hike right towards this square here where he puts pressure on both g2 and h4. Rook to a6. The rook is there to defend. We have one pair of rooks come off, and now This is just not going to be working out for the white side. It's not fast enough. This pawn is going to be enough of an annoyance. It's going to allow black just enough time to get his own passed pawn created, and again, this very active king versus a not so active king is the big factor in this more simplified ending, this more technical ending, with it just being one pair rook, or each side just having one rook here, much more technical. After a3, king f4, takes, rook d4, so after this capture, white has two connected passed pawns, but this guy here is super fast. At this stage, I was thinking king takes g2, and that's fine, but I really like the technique here on the black side, instead going with e5. This king doesn't want to grab the pawn. Instead, he wants to simply play rook e7 and push this pawn away, and there's not a good way to stop that. Even if this king comes over here to try and guard these three squares, e1, e2, e3, the black king would be there to simply offset the white king. Black is simply too fast at this stage. White offers a rook exchange, that's avoided. The rook essentially getting past, or getting behind what is soon to be a passed e-pawn. b4, e4, takes, b5, e3, and that's all she wrote, that's it. White ends up resigning here. He's just going to be way too fast, and this is a completely one position for Team Black. But a much more testing attempt here by Habu in this game 2. I'd be curious to see what takes place if these guys were to play a shogi match. I do not know how to play shogi. Feel free to let me know in the comment section if you play the game. If these two do play shogi, I will try to make it a point to learn shogi and present those two games. Well, until that time comes, as always, I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe found it a little bit fun. Take care. Bye.